Will the city of Atlanta embrace Russell Wilson as the next Atlanta Falcons quarterback?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. So if you don't know me, I'm your very, very humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for far too long, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I appreciate each and every one of you that is an everydayer of this illustrious show. You too can be illustrious by becoming an everydayer of this podcast and making it your first listen, your first watch of the day. And all you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, we are continuing our conversation that has begun the last couple of weeks, sort of leaving no stone unturned when it comes to who the Falcons' next quarterback options are going to be. We've heard from the various position coaches and OCs and whatnot saying that, it's a wide open book. They're still figuring that stuff out. So we're going to talk about two ex-Rams that Zac Robinson, the Falcons' current offensive coordinator, has some familiarity with, working with Baker Mayfield, Carson Wentz later on today's episode. But we're going to start today's conversation talking about Russell Wilson. Now, I know there's been rumors, I haven't seen the root of these rumors, the source of these rumors, but I've been hearing people for the last 2 weeks talking about, Russell Wilson rumors. And I'm like, okay, right? Now, the reason why Russell Wilson is being rumored to Atlanta is because we almost certainly can be very confident that he will become available from the Denver Broncos, who will make him a post-June 1 cut. Because basically, if Russell Wilson is on the Broncos roster as of March 17th, 2024, his $37 million base salary in 2025 becomes fully guaranteed. His base salary of $17 million in 2024 is already fully guaranteed. And I'm sure Denver will be open to shopping him in between now and then over the next, 4 weeks between now and March 17th. It's very unlikely that any team is going to take on that contract by trading for Russell Wilson. So almost certainly he's going to be a post-June 1 cut for the Broncos to avoid guaranteeing that $37 million in 2025. Right now, the issue the Broncos are going to have to deal with is they're going to have to eat a lot of dead money, a historic amount of dead money. We thought the Falcons were eating a ton of dead money when they traded Matt Ryan back in 2022. Ooh, double it. And now you got Russell Wilson, $85 million. Now, the post-June 1 factor is going to allow that to spread over 2 years rather than taking that all on the chin this year, right? Because if they took it all on the chin this year, they would add $50 million to their salary cap, and I think they're already $25 million over. So they're not going to do that. So he'll be a post-June 1 cut. He'll be designated. He'll be available as a free agent on March 18th or whenever they make that move, right? But from a salary cap standpoint, he'll be treated like he was cut in June, on June 2nd or whatever. And so therefore the Broncos will eat $35 million in dead money this year and then the additional $50 million next year. So it's a cap neutral move this year. They technically save $5 million next year by cutting him now, but we'll see. So they're going to just have to eat that, take that L now. Like the Chargers, they're going to be in the cap situation this year, but they'll be clear of that next year. And it's funny because you remember that conversation 2 years ago when the AFC West looked like it was this is the greatest division we've ever seen. That kind of fizzled out for the Broncos, Chargers, and Raiders. But, I think Wilson will be on the Falcons' radar. I think he should be on the Falcons' radar as a potential quarterback option. I don't know if he's going to be their go-to option, right? I think they'll certainly entertain the possibility of signing him, but to me, Wilson is more like plan E, right? If the first four plans don't go according to plan, then let's give Russell a call, right? And the main reason why you would give Russell a call is similar to the same conversation we were having last week about Kirk Cousins, is you're getting a veteran player. The difference is that you're getting Russell Wilson for cheap as opposed to Kirk Cousins, right? And the Denver Post wrote this, is the easiest way I can explain it. They wrote this a month ago. They basically said the Broncos can get a credit against the dead money for any guaranteed base salary Wilson gets from his next team. But neither he nor a signing team will have much incentive to commit more than the veteran minimum of $1.21 million in base salary, since Wilson's making $39 million guaranteed from Denver in 2024 anyway. So basically what that means is Wilson is incentivized to sign for cheap because the Broncos, right, the larger his contract is, the more cap relief that the Broncos wind up getting. And Wilson, and in this scenario, the Atlanta Falcons, would love to tag team together, team up, and stick it to Sean Payton. Of course they would. So the Falcons, unlike Kirk Cousins, you're not going to have to pay, 30, 40, $50 million a year for Russell Wilson. You might be able to get Russell Wilson on like a 1-year veteran minimum deal, maybe a few million, $2-3 million max or whatever. Proven starter, cheap player. That's a 1-year commitment, unlike Kirk Cousins, because with the projected 40 to 50 to 90 to however $1 million in guarantees that Kirk Cousins is potentially going to get on this contract, that's a 2 or 3 year commitment for a 36-year-old quarterback coming off an injury. Wilson is a similar age. He's 35. But you're not going to have to make that sort of commitment. And for that reason, it makes sense for the Falcons to look Russell Wilson's way as opposed to Kirk Cousins' way. Now, the problem with Russell Wilson and why it'll be hard to commit long-term to Russell Wilson is because, he's not a great fit in this offense. Similar to the conversation we've had with Justin Fields, right? Is that you don't necessarily love the fit in this offense. Now, of course, you always push back, which is, Aaron, we don't know what the offense is going to be under new OC Zac Robinson. And you're right, we don't 100%, but I think we can make a semi-educated guess. And if the goal of your offense is to attack the middle of the field in the passing game, Russell Wilson, like some other options the Falcons could be targeting, is not a great fit for that style of offense, right? Russell Wilson's strengths are his mobility, his ability to sling it downfield, right? And that's been the issue since leaving Seattle, because Seattle basically wasn't really asking Russell Wilson to play in structure a lot, and so he could do sort of his off-structure wizardry that we've seen Russell Wilson do for the last decade plus, and just sort of run around and heave up deep balls to DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, and prior to that, Doug Baldwin and whoever else. That's sort of been his game throughout his time in Seattle, and he was very successful. But what happened to Russell Wilson is he got old, and the mobility is not quite there, and he's not as capable doing all that off-structure stuff at 35 as he was at 25. And when you remove that from the equation, now what are you stuck with? You're stuck with a quarterback that isn't great in structure, isn't really going to attack the middle of the field. And so you have to kind of build this very specific offense around him. And that's not how the Falcons are built, right? We can sit here and say, okay, well, we don't know what Zac Robinson's offense is going to be, but look who the Falcons' top 2 weapons, at least today. We'll see what they are, a couple months from now. But Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts is a tight end. He lines up in the middle of the field the vast majority of the time. And I know it's controversial to say, but I think Drake London's best football, if you go back to the latter half of the 2022 season, was when he was not primarily, but spent a lot of time, like 30 to 40% of his snaps in the slot. Right? I think that's the ideal role for Drake London. And so your offense, at least your pieces right now, are really built to attack the middle of the field. That's what the Arthur Smith offense was built to do. And so I don't expect Zac Robinson to reinvent the wheel is basically why I can say we can make a semi-educated guess. So, Kirk Cousins, the difference between him and Russell Wilson, not from an age standpoint, from a salary standpoint, obviously is a big difference there, but Kirk thrives in structure. That's basically what Kirk does best. So we'll see if the Falcons really pursue Russell Wilson. I think he's more of plan E, right? If you've been new to the podcast and what I've been talking about, the various plans, again, these are educated guesses or semi-educated guesses, because I'm sure some of you guys question how much education I have on this. But, to me, plan A is trading up for a quarterback. Plan B is signing Kirk Cousins. Plan C would be taking QB4 at pick 8, which is probably Michigan's J.J. McCarthy. Plan D would be Justin Fields. And to me, I would probably slot Wilson in on plan E. And to me, if we get the plan E, it's because none of the teams that you were looking to trade up with returned your phone calls. Kirk Cousins finds a way to stay in Minnesota, or signs elsewhere because they're willing to give him the $90 million guarantee that the Falcons may be a little hesitant to give him, or whatever that cost is. We come to find out that as good a fit as many people think JJ McCarthy would be in a Zac Robinson-McVay style offense, maybe the Falcons feel differently, right? And then, Justin Fields gets traded to somebody else because someone else is willing to offer, a higher round draft pick or something else. And so then all of a sudden now the Falcons are in plan E, right? And they sign Russell Wilson to a 1-year contract and then probably wait till day 2 to draft one of the other quarterbacks, QB 5, 6, or 7, which sitting here today in some order will probably, at least as things look today, will be either Washington's Michael Penix Jr., Oregon's Bo Nix, or South Carolina's Spencer Rattler. So we'll see how that plays out. But that's to me the scenario where Russell Wilson gets here. I don't see him as being a priority. But that all being said, those are sort of the logistics to getting Russell Wilson to here. But if and when the Falcons get Russell Wilson to here, my biggest concern is, will the city really embrace Russell Wilson due to, some baby mama drama, I guess you could say, is the technical term. And we'll talk about what are the possible options for plan F as well, and whether that involves a former Rams quarterback that Zac Robinson is much more familiar with. And we'll break that down to continue today's Locked On Falcons. Guys, I got to tell you about Game Time, the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, comedy, music, and theater near you. And if you're looking to get in on some Braves action for spring training that's ongoing, or you're trying to plan ahead to April when the season starts, Game Time is the place for you. You can wait for those last minute deals, those killer last minute deals in April if you want to wait. But if you want to go in now, you don't have to worry about hidden fees. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And Game Time's guarantee means that you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section a row for less, they'll credit you 110% the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So as we continue today's Locked On Falcons, I want to plug the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel right here on YouTube. That is, of course, Locked On Sports Today. It's also available on Amazon Fire TV, giving you that top-notch coverage of the top sports stories of the day from the national shows as well as the local Locked On experts every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available for free on Fire TV channels app, and check out the Locked On Sports Atlanta so you can get the latest on Braves spring training, what's going on with the Hawks, and whether Georgia is going to get their third ring in 4 years. So check that out as well. Oh, and they also talk about the Falcons sometimes on Locked On Sports Atlanta, all here on the YouTube side of things here on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So my big question is, okay, let's say the Falcons do sign Russell Wilson. Let's say plan E or whatever comes to fruition. Will the city of Atlanta embrace Russell Wilson? And the question really boils down to future, right? Not the future of the Atlanta Falcons, but future, the rapper from Atlanta, because a lot of people in the city of Atlanta love them some Future. I'm not the world's biggest Future fan, but I understand why other people, or I understand to a certain extent why other people like him. I don't got any beef with Future. I'm generally neutral to Future. But for those of you that are not informed, Ciara is the R&B singer, is Russell Wilson's wife. And a decade ago, she was engaged to Future. They had a child. Future pulled a Jesse Bates, right? He does not believe in monogamy. And if you and him and Ciara broke up, and a year or two later, she, wound up marrying Russell Wilson, and they now have 3 kids together. And, for those of you that don't understand that Jesse Bates reference, it is because Jesse Bates is a cheater, right? When it comes to coverage. I don't know what Jesse Bates does in his personal life, but if it comes to coverage, Jesse Bates will absolutely step out on you. Who cares about the coverage rules? I'm going to cheat and get a pick. And Future is a similar way with reputed to be. I don't know future, but he's reputed to be that way with women, right? And look, I don't blame him. Like if I was future, if I was, a high profile Atlanta rapper, I'd probably be the same way. Like, but I'm so humble. So I don't have to deal with that because, just being a locked on host, anyway. anyway. So Ciara she's not an Atlanta native, but her formative years, she's from like College Park. She wasn't born there, but she's Atlanta is her home, right? And it would be a homecoming for Russell Wilson and Ciara. And now that we live in the WAGs era, the wives and girlfriends era, after some flyover state tight end, what is it, Kansas, Missouri, one of them teams out there. I guess he was like dating like one of the most famous women on the planet. I don't know. Beyonce is number one to me, but whoever's number two or whatever. And you got Kirk Cousins' wife having local Atlanta connections. She's from what, Marietta or Alpharetta or whatever, one of the Ettas cities in a suburb of Atlanta. Ciara's from College Park. So it's big business now to cash in on the famous wives and girlfriends of your high profile football players, right? That was the lesson of 2023. And so, would the city embrace Ciara's husband? Right? I'm sure some would. I'm sure there's others that, are loyal to are the Jesse Bates of rappers. maybe Offset's the Jesse Bates. I don't know. Anyway, controversial Atlanta rap takes. Let me know who's the Jesse Bates of rappers. But I think some people wouldn't, and it could get messy. So yeah, I think Russell Wilson would be a lot more polarizing to like the denizens of Atlanta than he probably would be for a lot of other cities because of that sort of baggage that is related to, relationships from a decade or more ago. So that will be an interesting wrinkle in the conversation. So that's partly why the reason why I sort of put Russell Wilson at plan E. Now, if we get to like plan F or plan G at the Falcons quarterback, like something has gone horribly awry this offseason for the Atlanta Falcons is basically what I say. But for today, we'll talk about, we'll just sort of assume plan F is Baker Mayfield and plan G is Carson Wentz, right? Those are two players that Zac Robinson had some experience with in LA. They spent some time playing for the Rams the last two seasons. You may recall Baker Mayfield spent the last 5 weeks of the 2022 season with the Rams after the Browns parted ways with him. And reportedly, Zac Robinson was like the primary guy that was, meant to get Baker Mayfield up to speed in that Rams offense. The same thing again this year with Carson Wentz. Although with Baker Mayfield, he had to play 2 days after he was acquired on a Thursday night game and played reasonably well against the Raiders in a win. And he was mostly solid for that final month of the season with the Rams and was able to springboard that into success this past year with the Bucs, guiding that team to a postseason finish and a, unfortunate NFC South win. But, it'll be interesting to sort of see what Baker Mayfield's market is going to be because he finished the season very strong, right? And that was a big reason why the Bucs were able to win the division. That if you start with that Week 14 win over the Falcons and look at Baker Mayfield's adjusted net yards per attempt, or ANYA, our preferred passing efficiency metric, over those final 5 games, it was 7.5, which 7.5 over the course of the entire season would have been like top 3 in the league, top 2, I think, in the league. Now, if you look at the first 11 games or first 12 games of the season prior to that Falcons game, his ANYA was 6.1, which would have been about league average. That's basically league average. And watching the film of Baker Mayfield prior to that final game between him and the Falcons, I would say like the film matched what the stats were suggesting, which is he was kind of a league average quarterback. Now, I've gone back and watched the final 4 games of the season after the Falcons game. But, my guess is, without having watched the film, is that through the first 3 months of the season, Baker Mayfield's connection with Mike Evans was very strong. Then in the last month of the season, that connection with Chris Godwin finally sort of seemed to click. And there was a big uptick in production for Godwin during the final 4 weeks. And that was a big reason why they went from a 1 receiver offense to a 2 receiver offense. And we know that the Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, especially in the Tom Brady years, formed one of the best duos of wide receivers in the NFL, and you started to get a little bit more of that down the stretch, is my guess. Not watching the film, but just looking at the box scores and the stats. Where we love a box score scout here on Locked On Falcons. But the other factor I think was you saw some development in the connection, I guess you could say, between him and Dave Canales. That they seem to understand each other after sort of feeling each other out for the first 3 months. It seemed to be they were firing on all cylinders in that final month with how Canales was calling plays and how Baker was executing the offense. And so for that reason, none of those variables are going to be ported over to Atlanta unless the Falcons decide that they want to sign Mike Evans. I guess maybe we'll have that conversation in the next month, but I don't think that's realistic. And so to me, you're more likely, if the Falcons do wind up signing Baker Mayfield, I think you're more likely to get the Baker Mayfield from the first 3 months than the Baker Mayfield of the last month of the season moving forward. So I think you're more likely to get a league average quarterback, which is fine. We spent so much time over the last year talking about, hey, with our defense, with our run game, all we need is league average playing in this division. As we saw with the Bucs, they got league average play for 3/4 of the season from Baker Mayfield, and they won the division, right? Now, what's interesting with Baker Mayfield, if you're going to go after him, what the price tag is going to be. PFF are our favorite guys in terms of projecting contracts. Project his next contract to be a 3-year, $90 million contract with $50 million guaranteed. So that's basically a notch above what the Seahawks gave Geno Smith, last year after he led them to the postseason. And it makes sense that the Bucs would basically say, okay, we'll give you a little bit of a pay bump from what Geno did for doing the same thing for us that Geno did. Now, I think that would be very pricey for another team to pay Baker Mayfield that type of money over the Bucs. That feels like a very expensive bet to make, especially if you're a new team like the Atlanta Falcons. Yes, you've seen Baker Mayfield in a Rams offense for 5 games, but are you willing to basically say this is our guy that we're committed to for multiple years, right? I don't know if the Falcons are going to be willing to do that. Now, if we were having a conversation about Baker getting half the money that PFF is projecting, like a 3-year, $45 million deal with maybe $20 million guaranteed, which basically would boil down to like a 1-year, $20 million contract at its core, like that would make more sense to me for the Falcons. But at that price range, 3 years, $90 million, I think that feels too rich for my blood, and I'm sure many of yours. So unless Baker's market tanks and the Bucs refuse to pay him, and he just basically decides he wants to go into FU mode and say, I'm going to stick it to the Bucs for not paying me, and I'm going to sign for cheap for the Falcons. And, I would be very open to FU mode Baker here in Atlanta. I want to see what that looks like. Because, if he's hasn't already been in FU mode, but, if we could get Baker for basically what I'm saying is like we could get him for the same cost that the Bucs got last year, which is a 1 year, like $4 million deal. Sure. That's a pretty good bang for your buck, right? That might move that up from plan F to like plan C potentially for the Falcons options. But unless we're going to get a bargain on Baker, that's where he's way down there in terms of plan F. And so we'll see if he leaves Tampa Bay. I think most people were projecting him to stick around in Tampa Bay for the same reasons that, a year ago, the Seahawks re-upped with Geno Smith. Maybe we should talk about Geno Smith because there's been some rumors about him being traded. So that may be something that we could explore on the future of Locked On Falcons. But we'll wrap up today's episode by talking about Carson Wentz of all candidates and why, Carson Wentz may not be an option to start for the Falcons, but it might signal that the Falcons may be going in a certain direction for a draft pick in terms of their starter. And we'll break that down to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Now that football season is over, you can get buckets with basketball season with your first bet at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your first bet wins. And whether you want to bet on the NBA, NCAA, it's all there for you at FanDuel, whether you want quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive player props, and maybe football season isn't quite over for you. You want to bet on the draft. Hey, check out JJ McCarthy's odds to be the Falcons' next quarterback, 10-1. Odds, right? That's the 5th best odds in terms of teams that are likely to draft JJ McCarthy over at FanDuel Sportsbook. So go check that out. I think those odds might shift over the next 2 months. So check it out by visiting FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on to shoot your shot. FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons, I believe your first listen tomorrow here on Locked On Falcons. I believe we'll be joined by Corey Woodruff, formerly of the Falcon. I guess he still writes for the Falcon on occasion. And we will talk a little bit more about Kirk Cousins on tomorrow's episode, as well as what Corey thinks the Falcons should do this offseason. So check us out then. But let's wrap up today talking about Carson Wentz. Now, I didn't watch Baker Mayfield's final month of the season film. Instead, I was watching the Week 18 matchup between the Rams and 49ers that featured Sam Darnold versus Carson Wentz this morning. And the Rams wound up winning that game with a nice comeback led by none other than Carson Wentz. And Wentz struggled in that game, but the Rams kind of made some in-game adjustments, started leaning on the quarterback run game a lot more after halftime. A lot of design QB keepers, a lot of rollouts off of play action. Wentz wound up leading the Rams in rushing in this game, 56 yards on 17 carries. 14 of those carries came in the second half of the game. He had the game-winning touchdown as well. And so watching the game, I was like, all right, Carson Wentz, he's fine. But to me, what was my biggest takeaway from that game was less about Carson Wentz. And it's more about, whether or not this team would embrace a running quarterback, would this offense would embrace a running quarterback. And, we've talked about that in relation to Justin Fields and whether or not they'd be willing to embrace a quarterback of his skill set, mobility, and all that stuff with the quarterback run game. And, watching this game, I was like, you know what? They seem to lean on it in the second half of the game. So it's not as much of a square peg in a round hole as maybe previously thought. But you do wonder, okay, this was a relatively meaningless Week 18 game where the Rams had already clinched the playoff berth. It's fine to do that for the second half in a relatively meaningless Week 18 game. Would you be willing to do it for an entire season, which is what you would potentially have to do with Justin Fields? And so that is going to be worthwhile debate, but we'll see. That's part of the reason why, I don't see Fields as that high. It doesn't feel like he's going to be super high. That's why I put him at plan D. I know a lot of you guys think he should be plan A or plan B for the Atlanta Falcons in terms of their quarterback. I understand that. I don't necessarily agree with you, but it is what it is. We have a slightly different opinion on these things, and it leads to slightly how we weigh these certain things. But, watching that game, I don't think there's a scenario where the Falcons sign Wentz to be a starter. As I said, if we're counting Carson Wentz as plan G now at this point in time, I don't think plan G is Wentz to be a starter. That to me would be like, wow, this is the worst offseason the Falcons have ever had. I think you're more likely to sign Wentz as a sort of 1 year sort of cheap backup, $1 million, $2 million, whatever. But that would, to me, signal that the Falcons are potentially planning on taking a quarterback in round one. That I think you're signing Wentz to be a backup, not a starter. And so your starter at that point in time is going to be a rookie. And you want to bring in a veteran that has some familiarity with the offense and some starting experience in the event that rookie is not ready to go week one or whenever, right? Rather than having to turn the keys back to Desmond Ridder. If you're signing Kirk Cousins, you're signing Russell Wilson for cheap, I don't think you're going to quote unquote waste any money on Carson Wentz at that point in time. You have your veteran at that point. There is a scenario where I could see the Falcons signing Wentz and then going after Fields just to give them two other non-Desmond Ridder options. But again, I would assume that if you're going after Fields, Wentz feels extraneous at that point. So to me, it most likely would signal if we get to March and we get to the, whatever first, second wave of free agency and the Falcons are bringing in Carson Wentz on a cheap backup deal, that to me would strongly signal that the Falcons are going to probably pull the trigger on a quarterback in round one. Now, the question, of course, at that point in time is going to be whether that's trading up, plan A, or whether that's sticking at 8 and taking the very likely to be QB4 JJ McCarthy, plan C. So that to me would be the question at that point in time. Don't have an answer. Don't think, Carson Wentz's sighting would indicate one way or the other. It just depends on what sort of opportunities come the Falcons' way. So those are my thoughts on those three candidates. I'm sure we could talk Geno Smith and Jacoby Brissett at some point, but we won't on today's episode. We'll leave that for future episodes. Continue to make us your first listen. Check out tomorrow's episode with Corey Woodruff. Check out Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Sports Today. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every